The morning began with a soft mist wrapping around the banana trees behind their small house. The scent of dew and the faint sound of roosters carried across the fields. Dee stood in the yard, tightening the straps on an old canvas bag. The blue sky was pale, touched with gold, like a promise of something waiting ahead. It had been months since the blue motorbike disappeared. That same motorbike that had carried him across countless dusty roads. When he was searching for Huyen and little Maya, to others, it was just a vehicle. But to Dee, it was a witness of tears, of loneliness, and of the long road that led him back to the people he loved most. "Are you ready, Huyen?" Dee called softly, looking toward the house. Huyen stepped out, holding a small basket of food she had packed for the journey. Sticky rice wrapped in banana leaves, a bottle of tea, and a few sweet cakes Maya had insisted on adding. Her hair was tied neatly. A soft smile lit her face. "I'm ready," she said. "Let's go before the sun gets too strong." Inside the house, Maya was still half asleep, clutching her little stuffed bear. She looked at them from the doorway, eyes blinking. "Mommy, when will you come back?" Huyen knelt down and kissed her daughter's forehead. "Soon, sweetheart. Stay with Aunt Lan today." "Okay. Uncle Dee and Mommy are just going to bring back the motorbike." Maya nodded, still sleepy. "Bring me something pretty from the south," she murmured. Dee laughed and promised. "I will. Maybe a little pink hat for my girl." When the bus arrived at the edge of the village, the driver shouted, "Goin' south. Hurry up." Dee helped Huyen climb aboard, the basket in one hand and her hand in the other. As the bus rolled away, the familiar green of the countryside slowly gave way to the long, endless road. The journey stretched through small towns, dusty highways, and golden rice fields waving in the breeze. Huyen rested her head against the window, watching the changing scenery. Dee sat beside her quietly, lost in thought, memories flooding back like waves. The first time he rode that blue motorbike, he had nothing but hope and pain in his heart. And now, beside him sat the woman he once searched the whole country for. "Do you remember," he whispered, "the time I told you I'd never stop looking for you, no matter what happened?" Huyen turned to him, eyes soft. "Yes. I didn't believe it back then," she said, smiling faintly. "But you really didn't stop." Dee smiled, his voice quiet and full of warmth. "That motorbike saw everything. The rain, the mud, even the days when I nearly gave up. It's strange. It feels like I'm going to meet an old friend again." The bus swayed gently as the afternoon light deepened. They stopped by a small roadside tea shop to rest. Huyen poured him a cup of tea, her hands careful, graceful in the golden light. "You're happy, aren't you?" she asked softly. Dee looked at her, really looked, and nodded. "Yes, because this time, I'm not riding alone anymore." Huyen smiled, and for a long, quiet moment, they both sat there, watching the trucks pass and the sunlight fade behind the palms. The world seemed to pause. Just two people, a shared cup of tea, and a promise of a new beginning waiting in the south. By the time the bus reached the southern town, the sun had already climbed high, burning softly through a thin veil of clouds. The air was thick with the scent of salt and dust, a mixture that Dee had always remembered vividly. He had walked these streets before, years ago, when his heart was heavy with loss and longing. Now, he was back, but not as the same man. "Let's take a walk before going to the station," Huyen said gently, touching his arm. Her voice was calm, grounding. "You look nervous." Dee smiled faintly. "A little. It feels strange, like meeting a part of my old self again. They walked past rows of small shops, children running barefoot, and vendors selling sugarcane juice under big umbrellas. The town hadn't changed much, but for Dee, every corner whispered stories of the past. The nights he had stopped here to rest, the times he had fixed that blue motorbike by the roadside, eating cold rice and drinking rainwater. At last, they arrived at the small police station. It stood quietly under a large tamarind tree, its yellow paint faded by years of sunlight. A young officer greeted them with a polite smile. "Are you Mr. D?" he asked. "Yes, sir," D replied, handing over his ID and vehicle papers. "You called about my blue motorbike?" The officer nodded, flipping through some documents. "Yes, it was found during a raid on a stolen vehicle ring. We've already verified the frame number. It matches your report." He gestured for them to follow. "Come with me." Dee and Huyen stepped into the back of the yard, where a row of recovered motorbikes stood under a metal shed. And there it was, dusty, faded, with scratches across its side, but unmistakably his blue motorbike. For a long moment, Dee said nothing. His hand trembled as he reached out and touched the handlebar. It was as if time folded upon itself. The lonely roads, the nights he had whispered Huyen's name into the wind, the countless miles he had traveled just to find her and little Maya. "It's still here," he murmured, his voice breaking slightly. Huyen stood beside him, watching silently. She understood without words. That motorbike wasn't just a machine. It was a symbol of everything Dee had endured, the proof of his love and perseverance. She reached out, brushing away a layer of dust on the seat. "It looks tired," she said softly, "but it waited for you." Dee smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "Just like you did." The officer finished the paperwork and handed him the keys. "Everything's in order now. You're free to take it home." Dee bowed gratefully. "Thank you, officer. You don't know what this means to me." When they wheeled the motorbike outside, Huyen helped clean it with a cloth she had brought. The paint was dull, but under the sunlight, traces of its original blue still shone through. A deep, familiar blue that seemed to hold all the years they had lost. "Let's take a ride," Dee said suddenly. "Just one round through town before we go back." Huyen hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right," as the engine sputtered to life. The sound filled the quiet yard, rough at first, then steady and alive. The same sound that had once echoed through mountain paths and empty roads, carrying Dee's hopes with it. Huyen climbed on behind him, holding gently onto his waist. The motorbike shook slightly, but it moved, old, loyal, and full of memories. They rode past the riverbank, where boats swayed under the sunlight, and through narrow alleys where children waved as they passed. For a moment, everything felt the same as before. The wind on their faces, the hum of the engine, and that quiet, unspoken connection between them. "Dee," Huyen said softly, leaning close so he could hear her over the wind. "This time, you're not chasing anyone. You're bringing everything back home." He smiled, eyes glimmering as he rode on. "Yes," he said, "home, with you." The journey home began at dawn the next day. A soft mist rose above the highway, and the world outside the bus window was painted in silver light. Dee sat by the window, the blue motorbike safely tied in the cargo space below. Beside him, Huyen leaned on his shoulder, her breathing calm and steady. The scent of her hair mixed with the faint smell of diesel and coffee. Dee closed his eyes and smiled quietly. For the first time in a long time, The road didn't feel lonely. Huyen whispered, still half asleep. When we get home, Maya will be so happy. She'll probably run straight to the motorbike before she even hugs us. Dee chuckled softly. That little girl has been asking for a ride for months. Huyen smiled. Then you'd better keep your promise this time. Outside, the sun slowly rose, gilding the rice fields in gold. Farmers were already out, their hats tilted under the morning sky. The sight filled Dee's heart with a strange peace, a feeling that the long road of searching, losing, and finding was finally ending. By the time they reached their village, the air smelled of wet earth and blooming flowers. The bamboo fence of their small home came into view, and the sound of Maya's laughter drifted faintly from inside. Mom, Uncle Dee, Maya's voice rang out as she spotted them from afar. She ran barefoot through the yard, her small dress fluttering behind her. Dee barely had time to put down the bag before Maya leapt into his arms. He lifted her high, spinning her around as she squealed with joy. You're back. You're really back, she laughed. Did you bring my present? Dee grinned. Of course. But before that, I have something to show you. Maya's eyes widened as Dee wheeled the blue motorbike from behind the cart. Its paint shimmered under the afternoon light, clean and bright again after Huyen had spent hours polishing it. Is that the one? Maya asked, amazed. Yes, Huyen said gently, brushing Maya's hair aside. This is the motorbike that took Uncle Dee all over the country to find us. Maya walked closer, her tiny fingers tracing the cool metal of the fuel tank. It's beautiful, she whispered. Can I sit on it? Dee smiled and lifted her onto the seat. Maya's legs barely reached the pedals, but she held the handlebars with pride, her eyes shining like stars. Uncle Dee, can we go for a ride? Not yet, he said with a soft laugh. We'll wait until evening. When the wind is cool, I'll take you around the whole village. Maya nodded eagerly. Promise. Promise, Dee said, touching her forehead gently. As Huyen watched the two of them, Dee standing beside the blue motorbike, Maya laughing under the golden sunlight, her heart swelled with emotion. She remembered the nights she had cried alone, wondering if they would ever find peace again. And now, before her eyes, stood the quiet miracle she had once prayed for. Dee, she called softly. He turned toward her. Thank you, she said simply. Dee's eyes softened. For what? For finding us. For not giving up. For coming home. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at her, at the woman who had once been only a memory, now standing before him with love in her eyes, and he smiled. Home, he said quietly, his voice trembling with warmth, isn't a place anymore. It's you and Maya. The wind rustled the banana leaves, carrying the faint scent of soil and rain. The blue motorbike gleamed softly beside them, a silent witness to all that had been lost and found again. That evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, Dee started the engine. The motorbike rumbled to life, strong and steady. Maya climbed on behind him, giggling, and Huyen stood at the gate, waving as they rode away down the small dirt road. The road that once led Dee into loneliness, now leading him home.